like to basically summarise what we've been saying and again stress our points. And the first of these is how socialism really is outdated in modern society, as pointed out by my colleagues. This basically revolves around the class system, which in essence is in fact dead and has been dead for a number of years now through the integration of ways of getting money and the idea that you don't have to be born rich and you don't have to be, you can get your wealth through hard work and things like that. And this is in essence not really an ideal that the socialism works around, and the idea of socialism is that it's equality and not in fact the rich that get richer. The second point really is about socialist parties that we've seen at work, and a good example of this is in the UK, in the Labour Party that we've had in power for a number of years before the 2010 election. And in essence, these parties which called themselves socialists were not in fact socialists and were in fact more liberal thinking parties. And this really shows how socialism, in order for you to get elected, Tony Blair had to dumb down some of the more core socialist ideals of the Labour Party, and as pointed out by my colleagues, that this really had to. Yes.
You said that class is outdated. But why is it that everyone from the cabinet went to a public schools in, say, Eton, which are for the rich?
I think this is a very good point. It's a point that it's, in some ways it's still coming out of that ideal, but actually, in some senses, kind of some of the more liberal people in the cabinet, such as Nick Clegg and people like that, did not come from as I'm sure they came from quite privileged backgrounds, not as privileged as some of the more as some of the more conservative people. So it's not entirely just to say that everyone in the cabinet came from with a silver spoon, etc. The Labour government. And in fact, the Labour government we had for the past 10 years, in fact, helped socialism, helped capitalism through open markets, through the use of helping growth and things like that, and allowing for the bankers, which have been mentioned quite a few times in this speech, to actually get richer and richer through quicker, while the poverty gap grew. Another good point that my colleagues made is about integration of socialism and how in practice it is a very good idea and an idea that works quite well, but actually in theory, as shown with a number of different cases, for example the communist ruling of Russia and most of Eastern Europe for decades, and the Labour Party of the 70s and 80s, really they didn't really work. I mean, they got into power and they ruled for decades, but it came down to it, they didn't really help and they didn't really do anything that was truly socialist. And in fact, it turned out that in the case of the communist government, they actually turned more to a right-wing idea, to the idea of being a dictatorship, which is the exact opposite of what socialism believes. So it kind of shows that even when socialism is put into practice, it all revolves back down to this idea of capitalism and this idea of the elite and those below them. Another good point to see is when you look at in the UK of not the Labour government but of the Liberal Democrats, which are meant to be in the middle, but if you look at their past ideals, they have more been swinging to the right, obviously with the coalition. And for example, some of their ideals that they push forward in the election, such as the cutting back of university fees, actually didn't come through. And this is a sign that even the Liberal Democrats are meant to be in the middle and moving further to the right and less to socialism, because that obviously doesn't get them where they want to go. Another good point is that was made was the belief that people cannot take care of themselves, and the Labour government before us held so dearly to them. The idea that people have to be held and nanny-held by the care state and things like that. And this really wasn't a socialist idea, even though it was a Labour government. This whole idea was something that was more liberal and more centre of left rather than socialist, which really shows the kind of, even in the socialist governments, they really didn't use socialist ideals at all. So, in summary, I'd just like to point out that I think it's fair to say that socialism in Europe is dead, because even now, as my colleagues have pointed out, that when we've had socialist governments in the past, their ideals have not in fact been socialist but more liberal, and that in order for them to get elected, they've had to push further you.